Hi, I'm Heidi Harriet. Welcome to Doggone Good Information, and welcome my co-host Tommy Fahey. Hi, Tommy.
Hi, Heidi. How are you today?
I'm good. We have a really deep subject matter today, but it's something I've wanted to do, and I got a guest that I was trying to get, Colleen Lynn, who has the website dogsbite.org, and came to this with her own personal story. So we'll talk with her in a minute, but it's just, I feel kind of serious because it's such a serious topic. I know you were telling me before we got on the podcast about another episode with someone you know.
I have a good friend that she was driving down the road, kind of an old farm road, and saw a cow that just had a calf, and the calf had rolled under the fence, kind of into a ditch situation, and so the calf was not able to get up, and the cow was not able to get to the baby, and it was, potentially a farmer going to lose a baby cow. So she went up to the nearest farmhouse just up the road, thinking that she would alert the owners and, be a good citizen and everything. So she walks up to the door and rings the doorbell, knocks, waits for a few minutes. And a pack of dogs, I don't know, probably about 5, she said, came around. And they're just farm dogs, they're cattle dogs and mixes and different sizes and everything. But she said that they really weren't bothersome to her. They were just kind of greeting her and, hey, how you doing? And no big deal. And so she was waiting for somebody to answer the door, waited an appropriate amount of time, and then said, okay, nobody's home. So she turns to walk back to her car, and one of the dogs was triggered and flipped a switch and grabbed a hold of her calf.
Oh, gosh.
And pulled her down to the ground. So she was on the ground, and there's 4 or 5 other dogs all around her. She said, luckily, the other dogs, none of them got aggressive. They were all still more, social and kind of looking at the other dog like, gosh, what are you doing? But the other dog kept coming. He kept trying to go at her, and she was luckily nimble enough to kick him a few times and get him off of her, to the point where all the dogs kind of ran off, and she was able to get into the car and get to safety. Wow. But she has a pretty big scar on her calf, and had she been somebody with mobility issues, an older person, a younger person, not as strong as what she is, it could have gone really poorly. She could have gotten a lot worse injuries than what she did. And, the dog, it's not necessarily the dog's fault. It was a farm dog probably guarding its property. And, so there's something to be said for that.
Right.
But
yeah.
It's also the question of, if you have a dog that has those tendencies, it's your responsibility to keep the public safe also.
Yeah. Yeah, because the UPS driver, medical personnel, people can show up at your property for various reasons, sometimes to protect you. So, giant signage or something, but yeah, because they do get territorial. The country scares me. As much as I love to be in the country, I'm afraid of people's dogs protecting their areas.
Yeah, you just don't know what you're getting into.
So get a load of this. We were traveling out in the Northeast for about 4 or 5 weeks, and my husband likes to drink beer, and we stop at breweries, which are popular. Well, there's always a lot of dogs at breweries. A lot of times just open air outdoors, which is fine. Yeah. I do take issue with people taking their dogs inside, and they just completely do that all the time. However, we were at one and got caught in a rainstorm, so we were there, the poor girl behind the counter. Everybody had left but us, so we're chatting away. She's like, please go. So on the counter, I see a form, and I was like, what is that? Because I see it says pet policy. They actually had an issue. People bring their dogs, and they've had dogs get into fights. And it upsets them. And the girl behind the counter that I was talking with, who was working there, certainly loved dogs and all that, but she was really frustrated. I think she'd been somebody who thought it was all good till she worked there and had to deal with it. So they had one that was so bad that it became a lawsuit. A woman
Oh,
who
geez.
did not have a dog got up to go get a beer. And you know how people let their dogs on the long leash go visit and they don't lay under your
Yep.
table. They should have to stay with you. I hate it when they do
Right.
that. So anyhow, they had a lawsuit. And as a result, you have to fill out this paper if you bring a dog. I love it because it says you have to own and have housed a pet for at least 30 days, no longer than a 6-foot leash, which is way too long. Current on vaccinations. What does Tommy always say? If they're not asking you for their shots, they're not asking
They
anybody.
didn't ask anybody else.
DDTP, rabies, and at all times, parasite-free, obedient, potty-trained, attended to at 100% of the time, covered under your insurance. So they don't know if all this is true, but you're signing this saying it is. So at
Yeah,
least
if you
it's
sign
one
it.
more step, right? And they're
Yeah.
immediately removed if they exhibit aggressive behavior, disruptive in any way, or excessively barking, which that alone would
Good.
make me happy. So they have to sign it, and I mean it's an actual waiver of liability that I think would stand up.
Good.
So really interesting because it's all good, but it's becoming a problem because people aren't using good common sense and they don't have best animal practices
For sure.
in their mind which we've talked about a lot. And our guest today, as I said at the top of the podcast, is this is a tough subject. This is Governor Ron DeSantis. I'm in Florida. They came out and said that the legislature, but they always say it's him, right? Said that you cannot discriminate by breed specific or size of the animal in any government housing. I don't understand that. I mean, I always say, why did they have these in the first place? Somebody just said,
Yeah.
hey, let's do this. We got nothing better to do. There's a reason that there was a ban or of some sort. And then HOAs and stuff could certainly do their own things, but everybody's afraid of getting sued and everybody's afraid of getting hurt, frankly, like our next guest who was attacked by a dog unprovoked on a run. So Colleen Lynn runs dogsbite.org, the website, and has a story to tell us and also some insight into the legislation. Colleen, welcome to the podcast. We're glad to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me.
So I'm really excited to have you on. This is a pretty deep subject, and as we were just talking about, people are very passionate, kind of on all sides of this. And so let's start by telling folks you have dogsbite.org as your website. How did that come to be? What's the background on that?
Well, I live in Austin, Texas now, but at the time I was living in Seattle and I was on a run. I was training for a half marathon and I was just on a sidewalk going down and there was a person walking a dog and she turned around and saw me coming. And so she moved her and her dog over to sort of the grass in between the road and the sidewalk, which as a longtime runner, it's usually an indicator there's a little bit of a problem. But I mean, it's really nice when they do that.
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't even faze me. Just thanks, And then I saw the dog lunged and she dropped the leash. It ran out, sort of bolted out in front of me and on the sidewalk, and it just stopped and was like looking at me. And I didn't really, it was sort of an odd situation that was going to last a few seconds max, right? And I didn't really know. So I sort of like stopped and then it took off running. It jumped on me and knocked me backwards onto cement.
Oh.
And it grabbed the first thing it could, which thankfully, humans, we block, so it grabbed my forearm instead of my face. And it shook my arm. Like, so I couldn't, you just can't fathom it. Right. And his mouth was right here, and it was just digging. And I was like, and then I was sort of on a knee because I'd sort of tried to get up and that's when he bit. And so anyways, I fell back over and he dragged me a little ways. And finally, the dog had a leash on it. And so she was not the owner, but she was a next door neighbor walking it. So a lot of times in these cases, there's not a collar, much less a leash.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to get one of these dogs off of you. So she was screaming and pulling that leash, and it let go. And so I bolted out of there, and I was really close to the regional trauma center at that point. Just happened to be my running route. So I got there fast, and went into surgery, and that's sort of how it happened. Like when I got out of the hospital, because it was a fracture and shattering of the bone, I went online, and I thought, I had already sort of known that. I mean, I've been a dog owner. I was cautious of pit bulls. I didn't think about them. I didn't read about them.
Right.
I didn't obsess about them. But I know that I didn't want to own one. I knew that. And I got some French bulldogs and some small little guys because we had limits where I could live anyways. I didn't want any larger dogs. And so I started looking online, and I'm really good at that because I'm a 1.0.comer, and that's what I did for a living. And I found all these forum boards, and there was all this propaganda like pit bulls are nanny dogs, and it's all about the owner. And I was like, what is this? What's going on? That I thought this was sort of general knowledge, right? And so I was really surprised by that. The web back then looked very different because there wasn't social media.
What's his time frame that this happened?
2007.
Okay, gotcha.
So we're looking at like dog fighting forum boards and pit bull forum boards, and I was like, this is like creepy. So Seattle wasn't that far away from San Francisco, and San Francisco had in the last year implemented the mandatory pit bull spay neuter law. So I started finding information about that. And then, of course, I found information about Denver. They are pretty well documented online about their ban because they had so many legal challenges. And so I decided
Denver had a pit bull ban, you're saying? Denver? Okay.
Yes,
okay. Interesting.
Many okay. They repealed a couple of years ago. Well, they repealed down to a licensing restriction.
Okay.
But Denver had the most legal challenges and overcame each of them. That's partly why they're the model pit bull ban ordinance in the U.S.
Oh, okay.
Can withstand the legal challenges. So I decided to write this white paper for Seattle, which is pretty specific to Seattle and our statistics, our dog bite statistics locally, and what San Francisco had done, what Denver had done. And I brought it to the city council. It's like 20 pages. And they did not want to talk about breed-specific legislation, even though I was strongly, pushing for the San Francisco sort of mandatory spay neuter, which is obviously, a light version compared to a ban.
Yeah.
But it gets to some of the same reasons, right? It can lower the population. And they said, no way. So I took the paper and put it online, and that became version 1.0 of dogsbite.org, because I knew that there would be other jurisdictions and other parts of the country that might need it. So that's really how it started. And it wasn't about, I'm starting a nonprofit. No, it wasn't about that. I spent quite a bit of time writing that white paper, and I wanted to put it online. So, not just throw it away.
Wow.
That's started.
A lot of story, Tommy, huh?
Yeah. Tragic beginning.
Yeah.
That was, and it's interesting. And I told this to another person not too long ago, but so I was in shock, for 6 to 8 weeks. You're sort of like,
for sure.
Oh, I'm not really hurt. Oh, I'm going to keep jogging. Oh, and there's all of this emotional stuff happening.
Yeah.
And when I finally started, and I don't cry, I don't do anything. I'm just like, I want to, I'm going on the news, and I'm talking about this thing I want to bring to the council, and I'm just, going off. I'm totally lucid, and I'm well researched, and then I'm driving. So it's about 6 weeks afterwards because I can use my, hand now, my stick shift, and there's a school bus in front of me, and it stops, and I'm really close to my house, and I'm like, gosh, this school bus is stopping in the middle of a block. I was like, I just didn't remember that they used to do that. Like, I always thought they stopped at like the edge of the end of a block or the beginning. And I don't know, I guess I was in a hurry or something. So I sat there, and there's nothing you can do. We got cars, it's got 2 lanes. It's like this skinny in Seattle, and you got cars parked on both sides. So I'm just like, okay, anyways, these little kids pile out, 6 years old, something like that. And I'm just sort of looking at them and, waiting for the bus. And then I realized they're standing where I was attacked.
Oh.
And that is when I completely lost it. Just like,
Wow.
you know how you like hiccup when you cry?
Yeah.
That kind of crying. And I even thought that, oh my God, I'm scaring those kids. They're looking at me in my little VW bug, bawling in this bus. And I was able, once the bus started going, there was a little parking, there was an area for me to pull my car over. So I did. I just cried for a really long time. And I knew then that I had to build the website.
Yeah.
So that, it could have, just knowing this is a very universal thing with victims in that, if you can just prevent it from happening to one person, really important. And just to know those kids were standing right, it was a Sunday, a Father's Day, 3:00 in the afternoon. Well, I don't know what time, but it was not early, it was not late, it was afternoon jog. And I just thought, my God, anyways, that was I think it's a very common response, but that cemented it for me. This is going to get done, and I don't care how controversial it's going to be.
So, all right. So now you start the website, and I'm assuming you started getting inundated. Was anybody keeping any statistics? Or I know there's a lot of momentum to try to not have statistics in that because it doesn't bode well for the community. So what did that look like? Were you inundated and people finally happy to have a place to put their info or? Yeah,
initially we were sort of a clearinghouse. We still are.
Yeah.
But at that early stage, we started collecting dog bite fatalities sometime in 2008.
Okay.
So the site launched in October 2007. So we're just about to have our 16th anniversary a few days from now.
Wow.
I know, it's a long time. And so we started to do that in about 2008. And because we realized that the CDC is no longer sort of publishing this data and that no one is.
Yeah.
That we could find. We know we had known about, there's another group called Animals 24/7 that was also in Washington State at that time, who had a log of attacks by breed. So decided to do the fatalities since that wasn't being done. And then we also collect local statistics. So that was all just sort of just beginning in 2008, 2009 is when we start to compile statistics.
Okay. How do you identify, I know this is a big one, the pit bull, or what do they, in breed specific legislation? Because I keep hearing they're not actually a breed, or it's the American Bully or the American Staffordshire Terrier. Or how does that work? How do they actually, in these legislation, how do you identify that?
Often it is vis-a-vis the Denver ban. Again, that's the ban that's withstood the challenges. So they have a very specific definition of what a pit bull is.
Okay.
And that is the American Pit Bull Terrier, the American Staffordshire Terrier, and the Staffordshire Bull Terrier, and what those breed standards are in AKC and UKC, and I think ADBA as well, which is the American Dog Breeder Association. So it is, that was specific to Denver and many other ordinances. And that's generally speaking the legal definition. Now, Ohio had something, they were the only state to ever have a state level pit bull law. And they had that for 20 some odd years. It was repealed, I think I want to say 2012, something like that. But they went through all of these different court rulings too, and finally came up with this language, a dog commonly known as a pit bull.
Oh, so I like that.
That is nice because it's going to throw in the American Bulldog, and it even captured the Presa Canario. So Ohio went a very different direction in their definition of a pit bull than those jurisdictions that said we're going to specifically name a breed, and you can say as long as it's a mixture of any of those three breeds. So the mixture was there. It wasn't like a mixture with a collie. It was a mixture between an American pit bull and an American Staffordshire, something like that. Although some ordinances are a little bit, have more mix in them. But at the end of the day, what I've seen in 16 years is that a jurisdiction is only going to go through with, taking a dog if they know. I mean, there's no question in their mind, right? It's not like it could be a pit bull, it might not be a pit bull, because they're going to have to defend that. They have to defend their choice.
So confiscating a dog, you're saying they have to, they have to be able to.
And so that's a very serious thing. And so, like, even in Denver, there was a ton of pit bulls. You call them pit bull. They weren't perfect pit bulls that fell under the ordinance, right? So there were still, numerous pit bull mixes and things like that. And that's very common. That clearly happened in Miami-Dade. I mean, it had to be the most perfect to be applied to the Miami-Dade ban. And we're talking 90% of the other pit bulls and pit bull mixes. Oh, it's a little bit more of American Bulldog. The American Bulldog is very popular down in southern Florida. So none of those counted. So it's almost, when there is an ordinance, it's usually, I find that jurisdictions are more cautious and they want a 100% verdict on that yes, this is a pit bull. So they're not going to be playing around with non-pit bulls or part pit bulls. Oh.
Lost the audio.
There we go. So Tommy, to catch you up, and I think we talked about this online, that Florida Governor DeSantis, they just said that you can't have, and Colleen, you could correct me if I'm wrong, they can't be breed specific and they can't be size specific to keep you out of, I think, government housing, right? This doesn't apply to private. Maybe can you speak to that a little bit? Yeah.
Right. So all municipalities, right? So this affects all municipalities who had a local breed specific ordinance and breed specific policy. This probably applies to some shelters won't adopt out pit bulls. So sometimes there's different policies. So we'll see if any of those are contested or sort of what happens there. But generally, it's no ordinances from municipalities. And then, of course, the public housing, which it's very common to have. It's probably more common to have size restrictions in public housing than it even is to have breed-specific legislation, because it really is the same thing. When you say not over 25 pounds, you're talking about, German Shepherds, you're talking about pit bulls, you're talking about Rottweilers, you're talking about Mastiffs.
Yeah.
So, it's safer for them to just sort of like have a size restriction, then they don't have to identify and all of that, right?
Right.
Easier definition.
Right. Yeah. And it's an easier definition. And that there's so many forms of public housing. There's like actual homes and there's townhouses. And then there's sort of like more condensed living in apartment buildings. And so, when I was watching the arguments, this particular argument happening in Maine, because in this past legislative session, bills were brought in 5 or 6 or 7 states. And so it passed in 4, didn't pass in every state. It was brought in. So those public housing people really got together and said no, and said, it's not a one size fits all. There's so many different forms of public housing. You've got to let them decide. And also, the fair housing, you can make size restrictions, I believe, maybe not on a service dog, but there are certain restrictions that even the HUD allows landlords to do. And so they were like saying, and now we can't even do that when it's federally allowed. So there was actually some really good arguments in Maine, at least. But yeah, I think that it will lower the quality of life for some people living in public housing. And I think that is sad, because this is all about sort of the pit bull lobby and let's, get pit bulls out into public housing. Okay. They can have all kinds of dogs. I mean, I don't know why pit bulls would be so important in public housing. It feels like more of a check off the list for the pit bull lobbyists.
So you mentioned Ohio. So they repealed it. what kind of statistics do you see any change in the statistics after the repeal? Have the incidents gone up? That type of thing. Do you see anything like that?
Yeah, so I know it's sort of, fatalities are rare, but so during the 25-year, it was pit bulls were declared vicious and you had to have insurance.
Okay.
That was a law, so you could own them, but you had to secure them and you had to have some form of insurance. So Ohio had a insurance pool you could join.
Okay.
Something like that. And again, most of the time it's probably going to be okay. Well, it was declared vicious, so it probably was expensive in that state. So there was just only a slight few fatalities in 25 years. And after that period, it's gone significantly up. I do have a map of that, but it's 3, 4, 5 times as many in like just 7 years since the repeal than there was in all of 25 years. So, that's
so telling. I mean, I don't understand how people don't want to hear the numbers. I guess it's confusing. What do you think, Tommy?
So I'm one of the classes I took when I got my bachelor's degree was a companion animal class, and we discussed a lot of breed specific legislation and that kind of stuff, and the pros and cons and what we're dealing with. And one of the questions that was brought up is, we have maybe a written definition of what is a pit bull or what is it that we are banning specifically, but then who is it actually up to? Whose job is it to decide this is the pit bull or this is a mix or this is not a pit bull? And I think that seems to be a big issue where we talked about size restriction is a lot easier. It's very easy to put a dog on a scale and say it's over 25 pounds.
Right.
It's a lot more subjective to say this dog has this many attributes that are pit bull-ish. And so then you have to have a person whose job it is to decide, what is this dog? Is it what we're banning? And so what is their training? What is their background? How are they defining it? Those all come into question. And then who's funding that? Who's paying that guy's salary?
Always the case. How is the legislation funded, right? That's always
exactly. Yeah, that's always the question. So a lot more about this, I'm sure, Kelly, with your background. But when it comes to these kinds of restrictions and kinds of bans, what are we running into? Where is the funding? How are we training the people to decide what is the specific dog? How are we judging that? And how are we funding it?
Well, so if a Miami-Dade, for instance, passed the ordinance, it's funded by the county because it's those animal control workers who will be doing that. Now, I haven't seen this particular checklist from Miami-Dade, but it was at least 20 items. Yeah. So they had to go down and check. And I think that checklist has changed, been modified. I know it got more open some years ago. So in the sense of, it got narrower. So fewer and fewer dogs were actually designated pit bulls.
Right.
I heard Miami had such a big loophole that virtually everybody could, make it work for them.
Right. And so I don't know. I mean, clearly if it's a municipal ordinance, it's that animal control department. Mm-hmm. Every now and again, it's a really small jurisdiction. And so the animal control department will say XYZ, it makes all these measurements, it matches this breed standard. They can sometimes fit into the ordinance, they can get a DNA breed test. If it's contested, the owner will have to pay for that. And so I think that there may even be some jurisdictions that rely on a veterinarian, but that's probably more common with the HOAs, right? Because they don't have animal control officers. Yeah. So they have something written in that says, we think it is, so go to your veterinarian and let's have a veterinarian do this. There will be instances of that, but I don't know how often vets come into play in the municipal, but I mean, clearly lots of city shelters have vets employed too. So,
I worked in a veterinary clinic for about 3 years. And we would have clients come in with a new dog, and it would be a obviously a pit bull of some kind or some kind of mix.
Gosh.
And they would oftentimes ask us not to select in our records pit bull. They would ask, put some other breed on there, whether it made sense or not. So that's the loopholes, and that's the like getting around it kind of thing.
Well, that's because they may not even live in an area with breed specific laws, but it may be a homeowner's insurance issue.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want any documentation of that. I mean, look at that. I mean, that speaks volumes. I want to have this dog breed specifically. I've chosen this, and then I want to have someone lie about it for me.
Yep.
Right.
I mean, okay.
That's exactly what I was just going to say. And this is what I say I do this podcast because I think we've gotten off track with being overly emotional about our animals in general. I do another one called Animal Tales. I was just speaking with someone about legislation and regulations around larger, animals. But because people are very emotional and not practical, and what I say to them, because this has come up with some friends, we've talked about this, and I have pretty strong feelings, but I try to bring on people and open my mind. But I come to those feelings from firsthand experience as an animal trainer, as you're coming to it firsthand with your experience. But I always say to people, why was there a ban? Why are we having this conversation in the first place? It's not like somebody just went out of thin air because everybody's got time and money on their hands, municipalities, to say, let's just ban pit bulls. I mean, why? That people forget that there's always what was the cause and effect? Why did this happen? Because the incidents, which you're now tracking, you've been tracking on your site, which I use as a reference often, tells the story. And so if you want to own a pit bull, that's up to you. And if you're in a place that allows it. But when you have your head up your rear end, understanding that insurance company, they want you to have more insurance, or other municipalities or HOAs are saying this is dangerous. And then you see a pit bull with little kids and that kind of thing. I about lose my mind because, let me say, it's never the animal's fault. My father and grandfather were horse trainers, all exotics. And these dogs have to be in the right hands if you're going to have them. And I live in Pinellas County, Florida. It's one of the most dense counties in the eastern part of the United States. I've heard like New York is the next most dense county, New York City. So we're on top of each other, right? We have more than almost 1 million people in like 38 square acres or some crazy thing. People don't, and now you've got people who don't want to train dogs. They want to give love and cookies and go clean the shelters out and get all these dogs out of the shelters. It's a recipe for disaster. In my neighborhood, there's a guy, pretty sure they're Cane Corsos. I actually looked it up because I didn't know what they were. These white dogs, 3 of them, he walks at the same time. And they growled at my husband, who was getting ready to go for a jog. He kind of ran out the driveway and stopped himself short. And he's my husband. He's not an animal guy, but he lives with me and knows what we talk about as far as this stuff. And stopped, and the dog started growling at him and came towards him. And the guy's got 3 of them.
Sounds like a Doggo Argentino. Those are the ones that are solid white.
Maybe that's what it is, yeah. And
they're
the hunting, Argentine hunting dogs, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they have a role, and they may be very good at that role. But in Pinellas County, Florida, where there's, you could take down a 400-pound pony with 2 pit bulls, which happened to a friend of mine. And now you got like you said, these kids getting off the bus, a 40-pound child. I get like physically feel sick when I think about it. And yet people are, they go online. DeSantis is, that's when I reached out to Colleen, Tommy. I was on Facebook and it said DeSantis repealed that you can't ask for size and breed, and there was one other thing. In other words, they have to be declared dangerous to not allow them. Mm-hmm. And again, I think this is government housing, but HOAs can do their thing, apartments and such. But the comments, 300, I think I sent you the link, Tommy.
Yeah,
like 300 comments. Yeah. And my husband was completely annoyed with me, but I was just rolling through them. There were like 2 comments that said, wow, well, what do you propose to do if there's a problem? And people jumped all over that. But just the nonsensical, I'm okay if you say, Wow, that's interesting. I'll check into that. But just to say thank you, Descents. This is fantastic. Our pitties. And they all posted pictures of their pitties and all that, It's just nonsensical to me because I know. Here's what I say. I have a little dog who's a little jerk. He could be a little jerk. He's a multi-poo. But I'm
for that. He is a jerk.
He's adorable sometimes. But I am very cautious with my animals. My animals are for me. I don't take them to the store. I don't do all that stuff. And he's under control. However, you get people who think love and cookies are going to help. They're misunderstood. They've all been abused. Every dog now, Tommy and I talk about this often, every dog's been abused. Well, that's not actually true, but it's not the animal's fault. It's how we're dealing with them, right?
Right.
So I feel my heart breaks for these animals, and this is a true dilemma, but people who think they're going to take them home and love and cookies and let them cuddle up with their kids, my little dog's not going to kill anybody. He might bite somebody. But if these dogs decide to go, their inherent part of them is not going to stop. And I get Google alerts every day on animals because of my podcast. And right. Colleen, I literally cry sometimes about the maulings and the deaths that are horrific.
It's I think what really stands out, it's not just the hold and shake bite style. It's the extraordinary disproportional response, the smallest little thing. Mm-hmm. And so we are talking about genetics and what they were bred for, which is explosive aggression in the pit. And you go to pet and, 3/4 of the face is gone. And that is not a normal response for a dog. They will bite you and it will be bad, but not like that.
Yeah.
And so we see that, and that is why they show up in fatalities so often. It's this extraordinary disproportionate response. And then of course it keeps going. It's a sustained disproportionate response.
You can't turn it off.
You can't turn it off. And so then the result of that is more deaths in this country, in every single country in the world where these dogs show up. I mean, there are breed-specific regulations against pit bulls in 61 countries that we know about. And there's a lot of languages I don't know and I can't research. So, this is a problem wherever they show up.
Interesting.
I compared it, Heidi and I spoke the other day, and I compare it, having a dog like this is like having a loaded gun.
You had a great analogy.
There's a lot of people out there that have guns, and I don't have a problem if you have guns and if it's not regulated where you're at, whatever, that's your personal choice. But there are also very standardized safety protocols when it comes to owning firearms or having them, in your house.
Exactly.
That's, I think, the big problem with having these dogs, and not just specifically pit bulls, pretty much any larger breed that has an aggressive tendency. You have a loaded gun. You have the possibility for that dog to be triggered. And I think the other problem is that most people only see their dogs in a very controlled environment in their home, where there's not a lot of pressure, the dog is not stressed. And so that's when you hear these, oh, my dog would never.
Yeah.
But when you actually if you choose to take that dog or that loaded gun into public, and now you have a high stress environment, a trigger that you're not even aware was there.
Yeah, you didn't even read it. That's the problem.
Yeah, you have no idea what's triggering the dog, and he's probably not well handled. He's probably not really well trained. Maybe in your backyard, maybe in your living room, you can get a sit or a come here or a down. But when you take it in front of an audience, we talk about this from the entertainment perspective. We know the animal's trained when we can do the act anytime, anywhere, in any environment.
Yeah,
right.
That is not what these dogs are.
Yeah.
They are an untrained, loaded weapon waiting to go off at the wrong moment.
Yeah.
And people that like to have 2 and 3 and 4. Now, I think Cesar Millan might have had this whole pack walking thing. But what we've seen in fatalities too is that the number of cases involving multiple dogs has really gone up. Now we can't explain exactly why, except that dog ownership changes over time, and maybe you have one dog and then you get a shelter dog, or maybe if it was more common for people to have a one dog household back in the 80s or 90s, and now it's more common. It's getting more and more common to have 2 and 3.
Tommy can answer that. He's answered that on the podcast before.
Your dog needs a dog.
That's what he always says. Yeah.
There's that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the ongoing thing is, well, I have this dog, but he needs a dog.
He needs a dog. And my dogs are like, I don't need another dog. I don't want another dog. I'm perfectly happy.
My dog doesn't want another dog. I can tell you that.
Yeah. Why are you bringing him in here? Gosh. His dog is Jimmy Dean, by the way. He hasn't mentioned him by name on this episode yet.
Oh, he hasn't worked our way into the episode.
You haven't worked him in yet. But no, this is just such I couldn't agree more. It's when you get a couple, like this guy with the 3 in my neighborhood, and then there's a lot of pit bulls, and I don't like to go outside my yard. I'm a dog trainer. I train dogs for local people, but I've also trained for entertainment. And I couldn't agree with you more, Tommy. People don't even know how to read their animals. They say they're fine. I come in their house and the dog, right away jumps up on me or whatever. And then I go try to talk to the people. And now I look at the dog and I say, hey, quit. And the dog looks at me like, excuse me. And the woman said, he never does that. Well, he's in charge. You never asked him to do anything. Mm-hmm. So and now you're taking these dogs out in public and with the ability. And you're right. I feel that way about Dobermans, Rottweilers, any big dog, because if they decide to go. But then you add in the bully part of it where they do not, what you experience, they don't let go and they shake and they want to just destroy. And you can't. It's
that genetic trigger, that genetic switch that flips that you can't pull them off.
Yeah.
Like it goes, and it takes a long time for that to turn off and for them to calm back down.
And what the part of this that I'm upset about is that people are being attacked all over the country, apparently all over the world. But what I've seen on your site, because I've gone and I found your site because I was researching, because I trained a little horse, a miniature horse who had a pony sidekick because he needed a pony. His horse needed a pony. And they were in their stall up near DeLand, Florida, and 2 pit bulls came over, took down the pony, 400 pounds. And this woman had kids, and on her social media, the dog was sleeping with her children. Right? This is carnage. I mean, outright carnage. I've talked about this on the podcast before, and sorry, Tanya, because she does listen, and this just brings it back for her. But I know one thing about animals. It's not if, but when. When they've gone down that road, it will happen again. People are like that as well. Very seldom does somebody get cured from something. So that
in terms of if a fighting dog has never done that before, and then it does, it learns.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, so it's. I mean, each time they fight, they get better.
Yeah.
It's no different than putting down a border collie first time with sheep.
Yeah.
Because the 10th time with sheep, it's going to be better.
Yeah. Exactly.
I mean. So after the first, particularly an animal, an animal attack, so a dog on dog attack, something like that. I mean, that is just, to me, exceptionally dangerous.
Yeah.
And that is not going, I mean, there is management of that dog, or that dog needs to be put down. How, it's going to do it again.
Yeah.
So it can only be perfectly managed, or you're going to have to do something else with it. Because there's not a lot of safe places to bring dogs where there isn't another dog.
Right.
They're all over our neighborhoods.
And they will go for people if they get just enough.
They will.
The dogs I just mentioned with this pony scenario, they're still out on the run, and she had a baby in the midst of all this. So she had a toddler, and now a baby, and 2 dogs that have created complete carnage. And the county just kind of throws up his hands. I went to the hearing. There were 4. The hearing got delayed several times because the pit bull rescue offered them a lawyer.
Of course.
They were renters who didn't have anything. The pit bull rescue offered them a lawyer. The lawyer delayed and delayed and delayed. It went through like 3 or 4 rounds. The husband kept taking time off to come to this hearing, which was a ways from their home. I drove up and went, and in front of our case, this is Lake County, Florida, 4 other cases. This is just one day, one hearing, right? 4 other cases where somebody's dogs had either attacked people or dogs, or the one guy couldn't even get in his house. He was there to complain because the neighbor's dog was loose out in the country, and it threatened him all the time. So, and they all stood up and said they had American Staffordshire Terriers so that they wouldn't call them pit bulls. 3 of them couldn't even say the word Staffordshire,
God.
And it was really my first experience in that part of it. This was about 2 years ago. And then I really started doing some more research, and I since then started the podcast. So what do we say to people? I mean, how do we convince people that at least be cautious or understand you need to have some training? And you mentioned Cesar Millan. He's a badass. He does have pit bulls, but he is like a wild animal trainer.
We could all be him.
Very few people are him. I mean, and have that approach. I usually he's pretty good. I do take issue because he wrote on Facebook one time in the last year that they're great family pets. I was livid. I was like, you say that as somebody who trains animals, and he even said I let them know when they could play. They have to ask me for everything. They're not allowed to step out of line, and they have a great life because it's like having well-behaved children, right?
Mm-hmm.
How often does that happen? So what do we do from here? Colleen, what can people do? What do we do? Why do you do this site? What do you want people to know, or what do you want to see change?
Well, I think that, we started right when Michael Vick was happening in 2007. He was just getting convicted. Now, I don't really understand how huge that is because I'm just getting started.
Yeah.
And after he was convicted, 100, 1,000, 10,000 pit bull rescues were born, right?
Okay.
And rescuing pits became a huge, huge phenomenon. Pit bulls as victims. And so today, your average person can go down to a shelter and there will be many, many pit bull mixes. These are all dogs that don't have a background.
Yeah.
That no one knows. And I think that is the worst thing you could ever do.
That combination. Agreed.
You don't know the background. You can't say it's all how you raise them because you didn't raise them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you probably don't have the training to understand the signals.
Yeah.
That it can be quite subtle. And they will say on the kennel card, absolutely no dogs. You don't even know what that means. You don't know that means it will probably kill a dog or go after one and with the intent to kill it. And so I think we'd like to we don't want the public doing that. And, with today's media and since Vic, actually, it's huge coverage of an attack and huge coverage of all these pit bulls for adoption. I mean, if I was a member of the public, I'd be confused too. But I mean, really got to come down to those really core arguments. It's all how you raise them. Well, then you need to be really careful about adopting a 2.5-year-old pit bull that no one wants, ended up at the shelter, and you don't have a clue about its background.
Yeah. And you're not an animal trainer in any way. You just think you're going to rescue them and they're misunderstood and give them love and cookies. And by the way, shame on Hollywood for every actor and actress who stands up there and just blindly says, go to the shelter. Not only is this an issue, my shelter in Pinellas, where I went, at the time they had about 35 bully and bully crosses. And she said when they get any other breed, people line up out the door. Yep. A big shout out to people who run the county shelters and, the what we used to call the dog pound, because they're not asking for this and they do noble work. It's the private shelters and rescues who are making this like, oh, they're just misunderstood and, they'll be wonderful pets and all that. And by the way, and this is on prior podcasts, not only is all that a mess and wrong, but our shelters are not overcrowded with adoptable dogs. They're coming over to the tune of $1 million a year, fuzzy little dogs that people would normally like to adopt, that other countries are breeding because we keep telling them, right, because there aren't enough dogs. But yet here that we keep telling people our shelters are full, you got to get a dog for the shelter. So we've created a market, right, for this. And they, like some of the folks I work with call it retail rescue. And they want to put breeders at pet stores out of business because that's competition.
It is competition. They've done it.
Yeah,
they
have
passed
done it.
laws in states. So,
they have done it.
And
taken away our rights.
Right. People contact us and, given our very strong stance about this issue with the public and shelters, researching, finding yourself you want a golden retriever, you're going to probably find a breeder.
Yeah.
You're not going to find one at a shelter. And so, we want people to get dog breeds that they are comfortable with. We want to get the dogs young. And, you're just every now and again, some miracle happens at a shelter, but it's already chosen and taken. And you'll never just walk in and find one of these dogs. There's a whole system to keep only special people getting those.
Oh, they move them around right away. Absolutely. And they get top dollar, $1,000 or more dollars and that type of thing. And by the way, part of this agenda and commercialization of the shelters and such, I believe people are getting dogs who might not otherwise get dogs because they believe they're solving a problem and filling a need. And then what they're doing is actually creating a larger market for the countries. 113 countries were banned by the CDC from sending us dogs with falsified rabies and diseases we haven't seen in this country or have eradicated. And that's a tip of the iceberg. 113 countries banned, and yet it still continues to go on. Naya, Patty Strand at the National Animal Interest Alliance and others are lobbying to get at least stronger laws. It's escaping me, but they have a bill out there where they'd at least have to be credible. But don't get a dog unless you really want one and have the ability to care for it properly. If you're going to work more than 8 or even 8 hours a day and nobody's going to run your dog, you shouldn't have a dog. That's not the right environment. Okay, now you're going to get a dog walker. Okay, but why are you doing it? Is it because you can't live without a dog? Let's get a dog sharing. I say it all the time. Angie's List for dog sharing, right? I'll share my dogs. That way, neither one of us has to have full-time dogs and we get the benefit, right? I mean, to make light of it, but it does concern me that there are people getting dogs who really probably wouldn't get dogs if they really gave it a lot of thought. And as a dog trainer, I see things I'm very uncomfortable with in the way people are handling their dogs.
It's a lot more work than, you're sort of led to believe. It's an enormous amount of work the first year or so,
and money.
And money.
Costs a lot.
It does. And from puppy, I had a toy breed, so that was expensive just itself.
Yeah.
It wasn't an English bulldog, thank you, but it was expensive.
Yeah.
I was shocked. I didn't know that. And I had read my, encyclopedia dog books and done my research to find the dog breed that I want. I thought I had a handle on that.
Yeah.
I never have a handle on vet bills.
It's the things they don't tell you.
Right.
It's the thing they don't tell you.
Yeah.
And I love my dog. I can live without a dog if but I did for a while and then I got another dog. But, if you really want a dog and you're ready for it, that's fine. But just to do your homework and some research. And the biggest thing is don't make it an emotional decision. That does not in anybody's best interest. And in this society today, we're allowed to be emotional about everything. We're allowed to be offended by everything. We're allowed to be emotional about everything. The two do not go together with animals. And those of us, it's absolutely not. And if this is concerning you, listening to us, then maybe you have some reason to be concerned. What is that? Or at least look further into it. So, Colleen, thank you so much for coming on, and I'll post your organization in my show notes.
Okay.
And thank you for the work you do, because it's hard to find that information, and I really appreciate your providing the statistics and putting that information out there. Thank you for that.
Thank you for having me on your show. You really enjoyed it.
Tommy, that was obviously I feel very strongly about this, mainly because I just don't want people to get hurt. I don't want other animals to get hurt, and I'm so concerned about it. But I don't know what your takeaway was. It's such a hard topic to talk about. I know there are a lot of people who don't, have a whole different take on it. But what's your thought about it?
It's a very difficult issue. But like we talked about in the interview with Colleen, it's when you have a breed that they've been purpose bred for a specific job over hundreds, if not 1,000 years. So there's a genetic predisposition for certain behaviors in these dogs. And for me, I think one of the biggest issues is that the general public is not educated, or maybe is willfully ignorant when it comes to things like that.
Yeah.
And so when you're selecting your pet and you're selecting, what dog you're going to get, and this is something we talked about in the interview also, is do you need a pet? And something we've addressed a lot in the podcast.
Really consider. Yeah.
Really consider, what actual breed of dog is going to be good for you? Mm-hmm. Is a pit bull that has an aggressive tendency going to be right for you?
With no history that you have no idea about their history.
Exactly. And I think we're just not really in touch with the reality of that. The general public, I think, is not in touch with the reality of, what can you provide as the animal owner, as far as structure, boundaries, care, all of that. And is your situation going to change? Is somebody else going to walk the dog for you? There's so many variables that can happen that we're not realistic about when we actually think about getting that dog in the first place.
And I think
there's just a lot of deep questions.
I think we need to shame the media and the actor community, the celebrity community, who stand up there with the emotional music and say, please go to the shelter and get a dog. You got to save these dogs.
Yeah.
It's not up to you to save all these dogs. This is a dilemma. It's a big issue. But bringing these dogs into your home when you're not prepared for that, and you're bringing them into your neighborhood as well. You're not just impacting you. So that's what I think they need to be shamed. The celebrities need to be shamed, and the shelters are doing a lot of deceitful things that I disagree with. And then those who aren't are just trying their best to figure out this issue, and the best of them will not tell you this is a great dog for your family. They're more realistic.
You say shame on the celebrities or on the shelters, and then yes, to an extent that, but also shame on the individuals who are just accepting that at face value.
Okay, I agree with that.
I put it along the lines of, drink this healthy drink. It is the end all be all health cure. Well, if you're going to buy into that, shame on you for not doing your research.
Yeah.
There is no silver bullet for a health cure of some kind of drink. It doesn't exist. Yeah. And along the same lines, if you're going to get a pet, if you're going to make that commitment, do your research.
Yeah.
Know what kind of breed you're getting, know what kind of background that individual dog has. If it's already a 2, 3, 4-year-old dog and you don't know its history, there can be a lot of baggage there.
Even if it's not a bully breed, any dog.
Of course, yeah.
You may be wreaking havoc on your life. And who's in your house? Do you have a senior citizen in your house? Do you have kids in your house? Because if you go on Colleen's dogsbite.org, you will be in tears. And these people who didn't ask for this. And if you get more than one dog, you created your own little pack.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's a real problem.
Yep. You know what? We're just going to leave it there. This is a lot of information to take in, and it's some very serious heavy information. So I hope that our podcast provides some information to make you think about, animals and dogs and, your relationship to not only dogs, but what you're bringing into your community and that. And yes, we love our dogs. And if you're ready for one and you want to get the right dog for your family, there's a lot of people to help you with that. And as Tommy said, do your research. So we hope, we hope we're providing some doggone good information for you. And we hope you'll join us next time. Thanks for listening.